So we're the West Coast Ocean Data Portal. My role with this group is as a co-chair of the work group that's behind this. So this is not my day job. It's part of my day job, sort of as a volunteer. Okay, that didn't work to get you to run away, so we'll come back down here. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background on the portal. We presented the portal here at the Ocean Forum 2 years ago. Our program manager did at the time. So this is a bit of an update, a bit of a history, a bit of the human side of how do data portals come to be and work, and what do they do in support of planning. So we do have lots of acronyms. I'll try to be sure to define them all. So the WCODP refers to the West Coast Ocean Data Portal. And this is a regional data portal, regional in the sense that it is the entire west coast of the US. It's Washington, Oregon, and California. So I don't know if that's really regional in the sense of folks who are coming from the East Coast. This started in 2012 as a volunteer network of people from a whole bunch of different organizations up and down the coast that were interested in organizing, cataloging, and making data for ocean planning and science available and discoverable. So really the point is to provide access to data. I've got the shopping list of people involved, generally, but at the time we started, this was somewhere around 60 different organizations from the 3 states, tribes, some federal partners, and so on. So a pretty big group coming together around this idea. Just to define a couple of other acronyms, and I'll get into some of these a little bit more as we go. Way back, like in 2006, this thing called the WCGA was formed between the 3 West Coast states. I'll come back to that in a moment and tell you as I talk about the history. So if I say WCGA, we're talking about the 3 states on the West Coast. I'll talk about the Ocean Data Portal, which again, it'll either be the portal, the Ocean Data Portal, or the West Coast Ocean Portal, or WCODP on the slides. And then something that's more recently evolving on the West Coast, and we have around the country in other locations, are these regional planning bodies, which are, again, groups of agencies, tribes, and other organizations interested in doing ocean planning, marine spatial planning, any of those catchphrases that you're familiar with on that side. So as I said, the WCGA, which is our predecessor organizational structure, came into being in 2006. And simply put, the governors of the 3 states on the West Coast at that time decided it would be a good idea to organize across state boundaries on ocean planning, because things don't stop at the border. We have currents, we have migrations, we have things moving around. So the idea was, let's get all of our state agencies and others interested together to work on these West Coast ocean health issues. And what they did at the time was very ambitious. Obviously, you can't read the letter, and it actually goes for several pages. Was they wanted to identify key areas of planning interest. And at the time, in 2006, they came up with 12 action coordination teams. And these teams were focused on issues like ocean acidification, marine debris, and so on and so forth, ocean energy, and so on. And they set up these 12 action teams, each built of partner organizations that had volunteer participation in these acts, to determine what were the issues, what were the data needs, what were the scientific questions that needed to be answered, what were the regulatory or policy types of decisions, and so on. It was an ambitious thing, to say the least. I guess the slide size is acting a little weird, so we'll try and work around that. Well, I told you they started in 2006. It took them 5 years to realize in 2011, it was actually late in 2011, around December, that these 60 organizations that got together around West Coast ocean health issues and planning issues needed some help with data. And I wasn't involved back then, so I don't know why it took them 5 years to realize data is important. I think based on the keynote yesterday from Clint and many of the talks through the last 2 days, we're all pretty obviously aware data matters. You need data and information to make your planning decisions. So in late 2011, they decided we need a data committee. So they created another act, another one of these coordination teams. That was ours, and that's when I became involved. And they directed the act to form itself by recruiting volunteers and to set up 3 separate work groups. So we have a work group on data. What data is out there? Where are the data gaps? What are we going to do to fill them? Data quality and so on. A team on information technology. In other words, what software platforms, what metadata standards, all those sort of IT infrastructure types of questions on software and hardware and technology do we need, and how do we stand that up to build and operate a portal? And then an outreach committee to actually try to communicate all this stuff to the stakeholder groups and the agencies and organizations as we move forward. So those 3 work groups were formed. As you can see, just counting up here, we have 3 work groups plus the overarching team. So that means 4 meetings a month for each of the, one for each of these groups, trying to work this forward. And in essence, that's what we did. We started in 2012 in January forming these groups, and of course the first things we had to do were identify data needs by reaching out to all of the organizations that were involved and beyond to find out what data did people already possess on ocean information that would be relevant. What was the area geographically it covered and the time spans and other metadata types of questions and issues. What do we have? Where are the gaps? What don't we have that might be important? So we asked those 2 questions. Tell us everything you have. Tell us what else you wish you had. And we built a big matrix and compiled all that data. And then went through a prioritization exercise to understand where would we fill in some of these gaps if somebody magically writes us a big check. The IT team did a similar process. We looked at a variety of different technologies for serving up data portals. And if you can put yourself back 5 or so years in time, we didn't have ArcGIS Online. We didn't have a lot of these tools that are available today. But at the time, there were a number of other technologies for data portals out there. And we settled on one called the ageoportal server, which is an Esri open source product that was available then, and decided that was the best way to go. And I'll talk maybe a bit more about that in a few minutes. And then lastly, outreach. Early on, there was no outreach around products. It was about all this, what do we have, what do we need, and how are we going to do it? So I said I'd talk a little bit about sort of the structure and organizational pieces of this. One of the big things, of course, is nothing is free. We had lots of volunteer people on these work groups putting in time on calls and doing background research and filling out information about data to get sort of the pieces in motion. But we also needed some real money, and thankfully NOAA, through the Regional Ocean Partnership Program, provided us enough funding to do 2 key things for the data portal. And I would say for those who do data portals, these are things you're going to need if you're not already doing it. One was somebody to sort of babysit the whole process, a program manager, somebody who could actually work with all the partner organizations on what data they have, making sure their metadata is in place, getting it registered to the data catalog, and so on. So we got a position funded through NOAA's funding for a full-time program manager. And then secondly, we needed the infrastructure. So even though we were using open source software, there's still the cost of putting it somewhere on a server, having that monthly fee paid, registering domains, and all the other pieces to keep things up and running. And then the third piece of it was none of these portals just work out of the box. No offense to anyone from Esri here, but they need to be configured. They need to be customized a little bit to your purpose. So they gave us a great starting point, but we needed some extra things done, so that also funded some consulting time. Some here at Esri was we got help with on developing some of the search capabilities of the catalog I'll talk about, and also some other consultants who helped build some of the other components. And then lastly, on the funding side, NOAA was great in getting us started, and I'm sure this is a familiar story for many of you who work with soft money. You get the funding to do the new cool idea, and then the funding runs out, and then what? And in this last year or so, we hit that then what stage. Fortunately for us, because the portal was ingrained enough on the West Coast, the kind folks at BOEM saw value in helping to keep things running and help put more money into the pot. And then the Moore Foundation saw value in helping to fill some of the data gaps and getting some of those other pieces taken care of and to do some of the outreach. So we received some additional funding from those sources for our more recent work. So as far as the portal goes, here's just a screenshot of it. We kind of built this to be very simple to access. Again, this is a sort of a custom reflexive interface. It'll size to your screen and all that fancy stuff, which was really fancy in 2012, not so much now. And we built around sort of 3 key things that I've highlighted up here. Discover, connect, and inform. That's sort of our motto as a working group, is we want people to be able to find the data, we want people to be able to connect with the data and the human resources associated with that, and use it to make decisions or inform things. So the way this is set up is fairly straightforward. If you know what you're looking for, you can just search for a keyword right there. If you're less sure but you're issue-oriented, you might go into a topic area to help you discover the right information. And this is helping you guide your way through those things. So on the discovery piece, one of the biggest issues, I think, even still today with all the great data portals we have is how do you find good data? We've heard that with ArcGIS Online and some of the things that we've heard the last couple of days as well. There's so much data out there. How do you get the right data, the best data for your need? So as I said, we have a program manager who was partially responsible for curation of the data, and I think that's an important thing that probably all of us in the room understand, but is maybe not as obvious to our colleagues who are not data people or geospatial people. Data doesn't just magically take care of itself and document itself and make itself searchable. You do need somebody to curate the process and to make sure data stays refreshed if it's changing data types, and make sure things are properly discoverable when you're searching for them. So along those lines, we did a lot of work around our metadata structures, following standards that exist, of course, FGEC and ISO standards and so on. And then, again, at the time, it was a fairly new idea, this idea of faceted search. And what that is anyone who's ever shopped on Amazon or any other website, it's this idea that you can filter down by one category and then subset that by another category or keyword and so on, building down through the tree. The open source software at the time didn't have any faceted search capabilities. So that's where we were able to work with Esri staff here to actually build that capability into the geoportal. That benefited our immediate needs, but it also benefits anyone else using that open source project. And of course, the most important thing, which again, you all know, is metadata drives everything when you're talking about data portals. If you can't find it, you can't use it. And I like this little note, metadata as a love note to the future, because someday you as the data provider aren't going to be there to tell people what your data is and how it was collected and what it's good for. So we really wanted to make sure we had good documentation as a requirement, essentially, to get your data into the portal. If it's not documented and it's not easy to discover and understand without having to track down the individual, it's probably not that useful to future users of the data. The connect piece of this puzzle, our second driving principle, is the human network in large part. And again, this is not the technology and the geeky stuff. This is just, we need people behind a West Coast process like this. So we have a number of places we work on the human network side. One is just the technical things like blogs, where we can bring up issues and discuss things. We have lots of data and documentation on the process in a knowledge base, where you can go search for help on certain things related to the portal and data setup. We have documentation on all these other components of how to prepare and serve and share data that all of our partners have been able to use to help both improve their own internal processes as well as make their data discoverable through the catalog. And I think, again, that's one of the big drivers of a successful program like this, is that we're helping everybody raise up the quality of their metadata and their data structure and their data sharing, and everyone benefits from that. The individual groups that are participating as well as everyone else looking for West Coast data. And then the other part of our human network, which I think is also extremely important and has made us successful, is we actually meet face-to-face once in a while. So we've had 3 network meetings where we bring partners together who are either already involved or are interested in being involved to help folks get their own catalogs, their own data, their own metadata in order to build the network for the portal, but also so there's a face behind the organization. So people actually know who they're talking to and who they can reach out to. And we have components of the portal that actually support that. So you don't just find data on the portal, you also find a whole section of people on the portal who can help you with things. And I think that's one of the strengths of this is it's not anonymous, it's not just some data catalog, there's real people behind it, and you've probably met some of them. Of course, the other part is data on its own is not that interesting. Well, it's interesting to me as a GIS geek, but to managers, decision makers, raw data is not useful. You need to convert it to information that's useful in the process of planning and decision making. So here again, we have a number of things we've been doing from the beginning. One is this idea, as you saw on that home screen, of having topic areas. So having something about marine debris where you can go in and not just get the data, but you can also look at maps. These are all hot linked to actual maps that are designed to communicate information in a meaningful way. There's some summary information, and all of this is dynamic and interactive like you do on any portal. So people can go in and answer a question or get an answer to a question they're interested in without having to know anything about building a map and doing queries and so forth. And of course, more recently with the story maps, now we can also tell those stories much more interactively and completely than simply having an interactive map. Now we have the rest of the story, the texts, the photos, the videos, and the graphs and charts that go with that. And if I have time at the end, I'll take you into a couple of these briefly. The other part, as I said, is looking at gaps. We were able to determine where we either were missing data or we had inconsistent data. And part of the Moore Foundation funding in particular this last year or so has let us start to fill in some of those gaps. So these 4 categories of data are places where there was widespread interest on the West Coast across multiple organizations in the States. So we actually were able to put somebody on the task of go out and build this out as a single data set that covers the entire West Coast, instead of I have to go find dozens of individual kelp data sets and build it myself. Again, if I'm a GIS person, that's not so difficult, but if I'm a manager or decision maker and I'm looking for kelp beds, I don't want to have to go find 12 different data sets in the catalog and figure out how to put them together for an analysis. So part of that process was to do those, and here's just a quick couple of screenshots. So we described this data set that was built, and it's shown as the data network as a virtual body is the creator. That's really, if you email that, it'll end up coming to me or one of my colleagues. But it gives you a sense of who's behind this and the description. One of the other nice things in the portal, and this is true of all the data sets, is it's available in a number of different output methods. So everything from REST endpoints and JSON to the more classic zip files or FTPs where you can download the data for use. And then in most cases we have the visualize button where it'll actually pop it up into an ARC online map and let you start working with it and combining it with other data layers. And just to give you a little shot of that happening, here's the kelp layer zoomed in on the Santa Barbara Channel, and you can see we've got the kelp mapped out here, and of course that's a full-on data set you can then work with and interact and query. So more recently, we've had this creation of regional planning bodies. These are around the whole country. There's a number of these that are specifically intended to help in marine planning, marine spatial planning. On the West Coast, unlike the East Coast, we have one regional planning body that's California, Washington, and Oregon. The whole West Coast is one body. So here's a quick map. You can see on the East Coast, they got a whole bunch of them. They got 3 up there, and the Gulf and the Great Lakes and the Caribbean are all separate. We're just one big planning body. I guess the West Coast planning is easier, because we just need one. All of these planning bodies have the same basic problem. They need data. And 4 of them actually have some sort of a data portal available to them right now, one of those being us. The other 2 that are really, I'd say, ahead of the West Coast, so those of you on the East Coast, good for you. You have the Mid-Atlantic and the Marco portal or the Northeast portal that do very similar things, and those are built into their RPB process. On the West Coast, literally last week, the RPB met for the 2nd time up in Portland to decide how they're going to deal with their data issue. So I went up there with my co-chair and sort of made this pitch. Hey, if you use a regional data portal, you coordinate your data, it's organized and searchable, and you can access and integrate the data that supports your regional planning body. That's kind of important because they're just getting started on the West Coast and don't have anything to build on yet. The other part, and this came up in particular because we have so many tribes on the West Coast that are ocean related in some way historically, and when we talk about data portals, there's certain organizations that immediately sort of step back and say, we don't want to give you our data. There's reasons we need it to be confidential, and they're good reasons. But a federated portal allows us to sort of work around that in a little way. We can still curate the known data sources, the authoritative sources, and their metadata. We can still structure it in a portal where it's discoverable and searchable so that people know it exists. But if you're one of those organizations or agencies or a private company or somebody with data that you can't just put on the web, we can still catalog it. We can still let people know it exists and who has it with contact information, and then they can reach out and say why they need the data and maybe work out some arrangement to make that data available for a particular planning process. This was something, when we presented to the RPB last week, that was particularly of interest to the tribes, because many of them are concerned about archaeological sites or other cultural resources not being too public, but they also understand it's important to planning. Seeing that they could have their data cataloged and discoverable, but not visible and downloadable right off the web, gave them a degree of comfort. And in essence, it's what led them to adopt this idea. So at the end of the day, when we look at that big picture of how we evolved, we needed an umbrella, and originally the West Coast governors. Now it's evolving to some other things to coordinate this whole process. As I said, data doesn't take care of itself. It doesn't catalog and find itself on these things. Somebody's got to be behind it. And it was really our human network that allowed that to happen effectively in the early years up till now. So as we look towards going forward, that was a big question. I alluded to our funding ran out from NOAA. That gave us the infrastructure build and the original program coordinator. And then the West Coast Governors group sort of faded away for other political reasons I don't understand. But now we have this RPB coming along, and something that they've renamed the West Coast Partnership. I don't have that labeled here, but that's sort of the new governor's agreement. It's now the partnership. I guess that's user-friendly. And we presented this concept to both of their boards last week, and both of them have come forward to say, these are important tools. Having a consistent data portal matters, and we want to support that somehow. So now we're in the place on the portal side with a bunch of volunteers saying, well, maybe we don't need so many work groups, maybe we don't need so much complexity, maybe we can work under the planning body and have just some coordination teams, and I don't have to do 4 conference calls a month now, I only have to do 2. Won't that be great? So I think that's the direction we're moving, but again, this is all sort of in flux for the West Coast right now. So I think one of the interesting questions that comes up as I get towards the end here is, as we move forward, we've got a basis, we've got an infrastructure, we have all the training materials to help people get their data prepared and cataloged and shareable. How do we move forward? Hopefully, I'm an optimist, so I'm going for the zone of high aspiration. We, with that support of the RPB and the partnership last week, will find support for a new program manager and resources to continue that. We lost our program manager when the funding ran out, and I'll tell you from definite experience in the last year, having a couple of co-chairs volunteering to try and keep something like this running, it's fine to keep the lights on, but it's not real easy to outreach to all the organizations to move it forward. So, we sort of broke this out in 3 areas. There's sort of the basic operation, keep the server running, keep the patches and things going. That's not too bad. We've been able to cover that as a volunteer group, but it's this coordination and outreach that you really need somebody keeping their eye on the ball all the time. And then the other thing is I showed you, we have the use cases, the story maps, the marine debris maps, and so on. Those are very specific. Somebody has to curate that process. What's the scientific or the planning question? What's the data that's needed? Let's answer those questions in meaningful ways. Those take usually a consultant or a project manager or a team of people to focus on for a short period of time, but again, they take resources. So I'm not going to go through a demo. Are you guys sharing the slides as part of the proceedings?
Yes.
Okay.
The slides will be...
So you don't have to try and write all those down, those URLs. The main one is if you just find westcoastoceans.org, you'll find everything else linked off of there. But these are all the resources and documentations where people can go to learn more. And with that, I'll thank my co-chair Andy and our consultant Allison, who helped do the story maps and the West Coast-wide data sets, and all the dozens of people who have served on our work groups. And for more info, you can find us there. So with that, I will stop.